Racism is the system of oppression and exploitation of national minority peoples developed and used by the ruling class to reap super profits and to keep the working class divided. The ideological component of racism is white chauvinism, a system of ideas which say that national minority people are inherently inferior to white people. Driven by the need for greater profits and the fear of a united working class rejection of capitalism, the ruling class uses white chauvinism to support and legitimize its systematic oppression and exploitation of national minority peoples, and to keep the working class divided. The ruling class strives to get the maximum production from all workers for the lowest possible wages, but pays national minority workers lower than the average wage for the same work, creating a super profit. The bourgeoisie also provides national minorities with the worst consumer goods for the highest prices, creating an additional source of super profits. The ruling class systematically discriminates against national minority workers, last hired, first fired. The higher rate of unemployment among national minority workers, as a result of national oppression, forces them to accept lower wages and worse working conditions because any job is better than no job at all. The ruling class uses the depressed wages and working conditions of national minority workers to drive down the wages and worsen the working conditions of white workers as well. When 3 workers are working on a job, and the one who is a national minority is laid off, the 2 remaining white workers have to perform a job that was previously done by 3 people. Thus, the systematic exploitation and oppression of national minorities is central to the ruling class' ability to exploit white workers. Racism is the ruling class' most powerful weapon in the class struggle. It cripples the class struggle. In the South, where racism is the most pervasive, the workers' movement is the weakest. The ideology of white chauvinism is particularly important for the ruling class to promote in order to keep white workers from uniting with their most powerful allies. As long as white workers embrace the ideology of the ruling class, as long as white workers accept the ideology of white chauvinism, the revolutionary heart of the class struggle is cut. White chauvinism keeps white workers from uniting with the liberation movements of oppressed nationalities. It holds white workers back from uniting with national minority workers and demanding a decent wage, safe working conditions, etc., for all workers. The ideology of white chauvinism is promoted by the ruling class in order to obscure the fundamental contradiction between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. White workers are led to believe that if it weren't for affirmative action, they'd have jobs. If it weren't for national minorities moving into their neighborhoods, their property values wouldn't go down. If it weren't for busing, their children would have a quality education. If it weren't for those lazy welfare cheats, a synonym for national minorities, taxes wouldn't be so high. This ideology is so pervasive that even the poorest white worker who is in the same condition as her national minority neighbor thinks he or she is better off simply because he or she is not a national minority. Even though they may both be unemployed, the white worker thinks that at least he or she really wants to work. The national minority neighbor is just lazy and trying to use our tax dollars to buy a Cadillac and live easy. Acceptance of this ideology on the part of white workers keeps them from uniting with their most natural and powerful allies, their fellow national minority co-workers and the liberation movements of the oppressed national minorities. National minorities in the U.S. are overwhelmingly proletarian in class composition. Black workers comprise nearly 1/3 of the entire industrial proletariat. Given that national minority workers face both class exploitation and national oppression, and that the nature of the liberation movements of oppressed national minorities have historically been revolutionary, national minority workers are the most advanced in the class struggle. The movements of oppressed national minorities have consistently fought for democratic rights and equality. The victories of these movements have consistently represented victories for the entire class. But the ideology of white chauvinism has kept white workers from uniting with these movements and with their fellow national minority workers, and thus the class struggle is crippled. During this period of economic crisis, The ruling class is working hard to weaken the working class and promote and use whatever divisions in the class it possibly can. U.S. imperialism is facing a crunch. It is facing a decreased ability to compete for markets, and struggles for socialism in Latin America, Africa and Asia have limited its ability to exploit the raw materials and labor of these continents. The ruling class, which is always trying to squeeze blood from the working class, is now escalating that campaign. Attacks on the class are coming in many forms, including speed-ups, plant closings and relocations to areas with a high degree of non-unionization, attacks on affirmative action, the closing of public hospitals, urban removal for the growth of finance capital, and a drive for drastic decreases in federal spending for social services coupled with a phenomenal increase in the military budget. These attacks on the working class are designed to make sure that profits are maximized. In the face of a crunch, the ruling class is cutting back on spending and squeezing even more from the working class. A central component of the ruling class campaign is to deepen the wedge between white and national minority workers and to fan the flames of national chauvinism. Theoreticians of white supremacy like Jansen and Shockley are gaining public attention, television shows and commercials promoting the grossest stereotypes of national minorities and foreigners, criminologists developing theories on why national minorities are so violent, the escalated recruitment drive of the Ku Klux Klan, the escalating police brutality, and racial violence in the neighborhoods are all part of the plan. It's part of an effort to keep the class fighting internally, blaming each other, rather than uniting against its enemy. And the effort to fan the flames of national chauvinism is an attempt to create sentiment for war. The extent to which this campaign is not combated is the extent to which the bourgeoisie will further weaken the proletariat. That's why it's especially important, now more than ever, for communists to take up a consistent and vigilant struggle against racism. To do otherwise is to assist the bourgeoisie in its attack on the working class. Communists have to wage a campaign against white chauvinism among white workers and promote a struggle for equality. Communists have to wage a struggle against racism and the ideology of white chauvinism which keeps the class divided and keeps white workers from taking up the struggle for equality and uniting with their natural ally, the liberation movements of the oppressed national minorities. The starting point for communists to take up such a campaign against white chauvinism is to struggle against it among themselves. It is absolutely hypocritical and idealistic for any white comrade to think that the struggle against white chauvinism among white workers is in any way divorced from the struggle against it within the communist movement. How can you advocate socialist revolution when you yourself don't think it's necessary? How can you struggle against a white worker's white chauvinism when you yourself hold the same views about national minorities? This is not to say that you can't struggle for the correct political line in a mass struggle and still hold on to white chauvinism. You can struggle for including affirmative action in a rank-and-file caucus program and still maintain a white chauvinist view of national minorities, but your ability to struggle consistently and sharply for the correct political line is blunted by that ideology. A white communist in our movement is a shop steward. He knew a black skilled tradesman was running for election in the Union. So the white communist proceeded to talk to all the other black skilled tradesmen to support the one who was running. But he didn't talk to the white skilled tradesmen about it, and they were the majority of skilled workers at the plant. This comrade's white chauvinism led him to believe that the black skilled tradesman was not the best qualified for election, even though he clearly was. The comrade's white chauvinism compromised his ability to struggle with the white skilled tradesman who he knew held the same views about the worker running for election. And he undermined the leadership of the black worker.